Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Risk Management School. My name is Nicole Alcocer, and I'm a member of the Pirani team. I'm excited to be here with you today to explore the theoretical and practical aspect of the different topics that we'll be seeing. To help us delve in this session, we're happy to have with us Alejandro Orrego, CEO at Pirani. Hi, Alejo. How are you? It's great to have you here with us.
Hi, Nicole. Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me once again.
Of course. And I will just be, I would love to invite you, everyone, to continue learning about the world of risk management school by visiting the Pirani Academy, when you will find valuable and learning materials. I will leave the link in the chat now so you can see the website before we begin. Just give me a minute. There you go. And finally, if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to make them to the question and answer section. And we will be happy to answer them at the end of this webinar. Now, let's begin with this exciting topic. Over to you, Alejandro.
Thank you, Nico, and thank you for all the assistants that already are connecting. So today, in this month class, we're going to talk about, as the invitation says, about main risk management strategies. That this is a question that a lot of clients and users of Pirani ask all the time, and we want to make a brief and introduction. So, what are the most common? So, I'm going to show you the topics that we're going to address today. So, I try to be very agile in the first steps, but before to talk about those main risk management strategies, that spoiler, we're going to talk about 10 different risk management strategies. It's important to understand a previous steps in that strategies, because it is important to choose those strategies based on the context and based on what are you doing risk management. So that's why we're going to talk briefly about what are you doing risk management in the first place, and we're going to talk about the risk management cycle that in every risk management school, in every class we talk about it. The step one, the step two, a measure. Again, just briefly, we're not going to dive into those topics because the main invitation for today is going to be about strategies, and then we're going to make some practicing in the software in Pirani. So let's start, because I think we're running out of time. So the first question that you need to address before choose any different strategy is like, what are you doing risk management? Is because a defensive perspective or a proactive perspective? Because this will help you to choose what strategy is the best for you in the next steps. So basically, the defensive perspective is some companies, and unfortunately, most of them, trying to maybe just doing for some compliance and legal requirements, or protecting assets and investments, or preserving reputation and financial stability, and insurance and cost reduction. And that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying that this is not a good way or a good reason to do risk management, but be very clear about it. And some other companies are not just doing the defensive perspective, but also a proactive, like not just because they want to avoid the fine or sanction for the regulation, but they also try to make a strategic decision making, innovation and growth, enhance resilience, competitive advantage, stakeholder confidence. So please be aware of what are you doing risk management in the first place, because again, with this information, with this approach, you're going to choose wisely the risk management strategies in the next steps. Because in the last years, we have a risk management school and a specific class that we talk about emerging risks. I really recommend that class. You can find it in Pirani Academy. In the risk management environment, we're talking about moving from the concept of business continuity, that again is perfectly fine, that is maintain essential functions and operation during and after disruptive events, to evolve in a business resilience. That I think is the concept that I most that I like the most, because it's not just again defensive, but the ability to adapt, recover, and thrive in the face of adversity. I think you can do risk management to growth, to thrive, but this should be your definition. And once you have this, or maybe that's another approach, maybe different areas in the company have a different perspective. For example, usually the CEOs or innovation areas, they want resilience, they want growth, they want thrive. But some other more conservative areas, like maybe auditors or internal control or whatever, maybe the approach is going to be more defensive or business continuity, and that's perfectly fine as well. But you need to define that and be aware of that. And then you need to be aware of the risk management framework or cycle that you're going to run. In the last class, we talk about many risk management frameworks. Some of you, I can see that you connect in the last class. But again, I don't want to talk about a specific framework. We already talked about it. But whatever framework you choose, usually the steps or the cycle will be something like this. So as you can see, before talking about risk management strategies, there are two previous steps. That is the context and risk identification and the risk evaluation or the risk measure. So let's gonna talk about, again, briefly about it, because the best way to choose the right strategies for your risk management is based on your context and your risk evaluation, because maybe the risk strategies that I choose for my company, for a tech and SaaS company, are not the same for a distribution or retail or just technology or food, are completely different. Because sometimes we think that the recipes are for everyone, and that's definitely not the case. So in the first step that we're going to talk about identifying context and identify risks, briefly, so you can first make a SWOT analysis about your company, about your market. So the thing that I like the most about the SWOT analysis is combine the internal and external perspective, like the internal origin. So what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And from the external perspective or external origin, what are your opportunities or threats? So if you're doing risk management for a proactive perspective for business resilience, maybe the opportunities will be very important. And because of that, you can choose a specific risk management strategy to enhance that opportunities. But and other threats, but if your perspective is more defensive, of course, you may be going to focus on weaknesses and threats. It's up to you, but this is a good way to start. Okay, what strategy is going to choose based on the reason why I do risk management and the SWOT analysis. This is just an example of a SWOT analysis for a fintech, and in a specific SWOT analysis for the ESG risks, environmental, social, and governance. So you can track, okay, what are my weaknesses, my strengths in this SWOT analysis? And again, this will give you a perspective of what risk management strategies can you choose. Again, I'm not gonna deep into this topic. This was another class, and if you want deep into, we can do a specific class about this. And another thing, but again, the SWOT analysis that I like the most of the SWOT analysis is that combine the internal and external origins and perspective. So if you want to dig into the external origin on the risk factors, so you can choose a specific framework to do that. So you can choose a framework from strategic analysis to assess and understand the external macro environmental factors that may impact an organization or in your industry. In the past risk management school and in the past class, we talk about two frameworks. One is the pestle and another one is the spectra. It's like, it sounds similar, but it's basically, okay, what are the risk factors? What are the origin that I must be aware of? The political, economic, social, technological, environmental, regulational, legal, commercial. So you need to address every one of those sources and say, okay, what from the technology perspective, what risks can impact me? What source or threats can impact my business? So when you do this, from the internal perspective, you can translate that into your processes. Okay, whatever thing is going on in the technology, environmental, okay, today we're talking about AI, or we are in the rise of cyber attacks and vulnerabilities and threats or whatever. So how can I translate that into my uh, internal operation perspective, my process map? So, okay, I have these areas in my company, in my business, maybe the people, technology, marketing, sales. What are the processes that I'm running? And because these processes maybe be vulnerable for those threats. And so in this way, you have the perspective from the external factors and how can impact your internal process map. If you're doing it in the, for example, information security, of course, you will need be aware of your assets informations. If you're doing it for anti-money laundering, maybe you risk factor like clients, jurisdiction channels, but again, the internal perspective. And then once you have the factors or the source and the process that may impact your specific business, then you can identify the risk for your process in that factor. So this is again is the first step of the risk management cycle, the context and the identification of risks. And then we move to the second, that is measure the risk. So once you declare that a specific risk may affect your business, the usual way to measure this is, okay, evaluate the potential consequences, the severity, the impact of those risks in your company. Maybe can be the impact can be positive, an opportunity, or negative, a threat. And even can be contain various aspects of variables like financial performance, reputation, safety, environmental, whatever, and the likelihood. And some translation says probability, but is the what how often can this risk affect your business? And that is why we use the risk matrix or the heat map. So maybe you choose, you declare that a risk may affect your company, and then you're gonna put it in your risk heat map. So of course you will need to define the risk levels. So in this specific example, we have 4 risk levels: low the green, medium the yellow, high the orange, and critical the red. And you locate, you place the risks in that risk heat map, because you need to focus, or you need to prioritize for all the risks that you declare, what you're gonna do with this. And when you locate, when you choose a place to put that risk, we call that inherent risk. So it refers to the level of risk that exists in a process activity system before any risk management strategy or control measure are applied. So my recommendation is, because some people start doing risk management strategies from zero, from scratch, and wait a minute. you need to do a previous work before to choose any strategy, because these will help you. Once you have your context and your risks in a heat map, in a matrix, or whatever name you use, then you can choose the strategy. Again, we have different classes and risk management, previous risk management school that we did into this specific step, because I know that I talk very fast about this very important topic, but we have any specific classes for these topics, like, for example, the how to manage your organization risks, align risks with strategies, emerging risks, that you can saw the recordings and the material of those classes. But we have an introduction of 15 minutes. Again, we're going to talk about today risk management and strategy. So once you have your context and your risk identification and evaluation, now we can choose what strategies can we follow. And another aspect that is important here that most of companies do not have is define your risk capacity, your risk appetite, and your risk tolerance. Because again, based on your perspective, it is proactive, it is defensive. If you want to grow, or you just want to prevent a sanction or fine from the regulation, that's okay. But define that. So what are you, or maybe if you are proactive, or maybe you are aware that you cannot eliminate the risks, and maybe your company need to accept some of those risks, or be aware that some risks you can mitigate them, but you cannot mitigate it 100%. So what are the risk appetite that you have, and what is the risk tolerance that you be willing to do? So you need to articulate the amount and type of risk that you are willing to take or accept. Some companies don't do this. And again, the best plan is the plan that you're running. So the perfect is better good than perfect, but it will be good if you have this. And then now we're going to talk about risk management strategy. So the first one, the most common that everyone talk about, I hope, is the first four. That is avoid, mitigate, transfer, and accept. Usually when you have your risk heat map, the next step is to choose what will be the risk management strategy that you want to follow. What you want to do with this specific risk in this orange area? Well, the first four say that you have four options. The first is avoid. And again, I want to be very clear that we are on the same page, because you cannot eliminate any risk at all. The risk is going to be there always. Avoid is not eliminate the risk, is removing and eliminate the risk source. So I'm going to give you 5 examples in the daily basis. For example, we don't swim in the pool where there is lightning. The lightning is still be there. The risk is still be there. You cannot prevent the lightning. Maybe if you're a superhero, but it's not the case. But you can choose don't swim in the pool. That's avoid the risk. Another example, we close roads when too much ice or snow builds up. So the snow is still there, but you choose closed roads to prevent the risk from happening. You eliminate the risk source. Another example. Businesses don't engage in illegal activities to avoid the risks of the sanctions. And that's why we talk about risk appetite and risk tolerance. In some risks, you can mitigate some risks. But for example, in the anti-money laundering area, you need to avoid the risk, basically. You don't have a risk tolerance for anti-money laundering. You not you as a business, you can do businesses with bad people. This is a risk to avoid. Or for a more preventive perspective, we design a robust product to avoid failures and eliminate the risk. Or we create a robust process to avoid failures and eliminate the risk. So the risk is going to be there, but you avoid some practices to prevent the risk from happening. So, or maybe another thing is, okay, after, for example, as a business, I want to open an office, I don't know, in Ukraine. And I locate that specific risk in the red area, or whatever area choose. So, you know what? What I'm going to do with this risk is I'm not going to open the headquarters in Ukraine. So the risks of the war is still be there, but you avoid to open the headquarters in Ukraine because of that awareness of the risk. And that's a thing that you can do. Avoid the risk, the first one. But of course, you cannot do this with all your risks. You cannot do, maybe you have 10 risks in your list, or 100 or whatever. You cannot avoid all the risks, because basically avoid all the risks is paralyze your company. It's not moving forward. For example, I want to cross a highway or a street. I can choose not to cross the street to avoid the risk of a crash or an accident or whatever. But at the end of the day, the decision is to do nothing, right? Is to not cross the street. So the question is, what if we cross the street? What's gonna happen if I cross the street because I want to cross the streets for buy something, grow something? So you need to have all the risks that you have, and once you're gonna avoid, but not all of them. So the second risk management strategy is mitigate. Mitigate means reducing the likelihood of occurrence or the impact or severity of the risks. And again, in a daily basis, you can reduce the likelihood. For example, in the pandemic, in the COVID, the masks, washing our hands, prevent to touching other hands, the social distancing were likelihood mitigation strategies. The less I contact with people, the less I'm going to have the COVID. And another example is reduce or mitigate the impact or the severity. Because again, in this example, the COVID won't be hit me harder or because of this. I'm preventing to get the COVID, right? But when we mitigate the impact or the severity, these are great examples. So for example, the airbag in the car, the airbag won't prevent the crash, the likelihood of the crash. But when the crash happens, the airbag will mitigate the injury in my body. the damage in my body. So this mitigate the impact, not the likelihood. Or the helmets or the security attire that I can dress will mitigate the impact. The helmet won't prevent the crash or the accident from happening, but will prevent the impact, the consequences if the crash happens. So you can choose mitigate impact or likelihood. The third example is transfer. And again, I want to give you a common example and a disaster. A fire, hurricane, flood might be destroy your home or your headquarters or your offices or whatever. So the transfer strategy will be to that risk can be transferred through an insurance contract, because maybe I don't know, you can prevent I don't know, a hurricane from happening or a flood, or will be very, very expensive to mitigate the likelihood of a hurricane, of an earthquake. So what can I do if an earthquake happens? Of course, I can build the building with earthquake resistance or whatever, but what? So that will maybe mitigate the impact, of course, but how can you mitigate the likelihood? So you can hire an insurance contract, because as we know, there are contracts, insurance for life, home, health, car, liability, flood, disability, identity theft. So that's why you transfer the risk. You pay some policy or something to the insurance company, and once the risks happen, you have a compensation, usually financial, for that. And that's the way to transfer the risk. And another example is maybe the cost of a major raw material like wheat could increase, which will reduce your profit margins. So the risk transfer will be that raw material cost risk can be transferred through a future contract. Maybe you make a negotiation or a deal with your provider to the future contract to maintain the stability of the cost. Or, for example, in the technology environment, the SaaS company, the best advantage of that is the scalability and the approach of maybe I will have a high consume of server in a specific time period, like I don't know, Black Friday or end of the season, but in the others I'm not. So maybe we can make a future contract or a contract of stability, and that's the way to transfer the risk. And the fourth, last but not least, the acceptance. And again, is deeply connected with the risk capacity or risk appetite. So the risk acceptance refers to the explicit acknowledgement and deliberate decision to accept certain level of risk. And after evaluating its potential impact and likelihood, it involves consciously deciding not to implement additional control. I'm okay with this. A daily example, and you buy a toaster for $30 and the store offers you an extended warranty for an additional $10. This is like some risk mitigation. But after considering the low cost of the toaster and the likelihood that it will function well beyond its warranty period, you decide to accept the risk of it breaking down without purchasing the extended warranty. That's accept the risk. Or in the example of crossing the street, you want to cross the street, maybe, you know what, I cannot cross the street because maybe a car is going to hit me or a lighting can hit me or whatever. And you say, no problem, I'm going to cross the street. I'm going to accept the risk. And at the end of the day, the most successful companies are the ones that take risks. But again, if you have 10 risks, you should not accept all of them. So the idea is choose wisely what risk you're going to avoid, accept, mitigate, and transfer. This is the first step. And then, but again, this is the most famous strategies. I think we all know about these strategies, but there are more. But if you're doing at least these 4, I think you're okay for me. But let's talk about any other. And but sometimes other strategies are basically these strategies that we already talked. There's a lot of literature and other framework that's I don't know if you already heard of the 4 T's of risk management. And I like this idea because, of course, it's the 4 T's easily reminded: the terminate, treat, transfer, and tolerate. But spoiler is the same. It's basically the same that we already talked, because terminate is avoid. It's the same concept, it's the same idea. Treat is mitigate, reduce. Transfer, of course, is the same on transfer. And tolerate is the same on acceptance. So again, I just want to give you the information, the concept, the names, and it's up to you. If you want to, if you think your team will gonna remember better the 4 T's than the other, I think it's perfectly fine. It's up to you. But I just want to give you. So I'm not gonna count these other 4 in the 10 because that would be like a cheating. But I just want to give you the information. So again, we have the avoid, mitigate, transfer, accept, and then is the same of terminate, treat, transfer, and tolerate. So we're still in 4. So 5 and 6, from another perspective, from another framework, is loss prevention and loss reduction. And usually there are companies that only choose these 2, loss prevention and loss reduction. And the approach that you can see here, for my perspective, of course, if you have a different, please put it below in the comments, is like the loss prevention and the loss reduction is for me, is a completely defensive perspective, because as you can see, they don't talk about accept or tolerate. Is we're going to prevent and reduce and mitigate the risk, and that's why I put it in this some kind of framework that I just create. That, as you can see, loss prevention has components of avoid and mitigate, and loss reductions have components from mitigate and transfer. So I'm going to give you an example. So in loss prevention, the definition involves implementing measures and practices to prevent risks from occurring, and the focus is a proactive steps to avoid or eliminate risks before they manifest. Examples: safety training, providing employees with safety training to prevent workplace accidents. What do you think is this? This is avoid, but this is mitigate as well. 2, fire prevention measures, installing smoke detectors, fire alarm, and sprinkler systems in buildings. This can be avoid, a little bit of mitigate. You can hear both ways, and I think again is loss prevention. Regular maintenance, conducting routine maintenance on machinery and equipment to prevent breakdowns. Security measures, implementing security systems such as surveillance cameras and alarm systems to prevent theft or vandalism. The goal, The primary goal of loss prevention is to reduce the frequency of losses by addressing potential risks before they become problems. So for me, it's more mitigate than avoid, but of course have components of avoidance. So this is loss prevention, prevent risk from occurring. And the loss reduction, of course, will have more from mitigation and transfer, because loss reduction focuses on minimizing the impact or severity of losses when they occur. This strategy is about mitigating the consequences. So the loss prevention is mitigating the likelihood, and the loss reduction is preventing the impact, right? Examples: disaster recovery plans, developing and implementing plans to recover from natural disasters such as earthquakes or floods. Insurance, purchasing insurance to cover financial losses resulting from unforeseen events. Again, transfer. Emergency response training, training employees on how to respond effectively during emergencies to reduce the impact of incidents. And redundant systems, implementing backup system and data recovery solutions to ensure business continuity in case of system failures. So again, as you can see, are the same concept, but from mitigation perspective, in the loss prevention, you are mitigating likelihood, and in the loss reduction, you are mitigating impact and severity. That's why I put it in the both. But the idea, the concept is the same. Which one is better is up to you. I'm not going to give you, because again, every company, every context is different. So choose wisely. And maybe you can choose loss prevention and reduction and acceptance. I don't think there's any, no, you only can choose the first framework and not the second. It's up to you. And now we have 6 risk management strategies by now. The first 4, the loss prevention and reduction, and there are another 4 to complete the 10 risk management strategy. This 4 is not the same than before with other names. This is completely different. This is and in my experiences, companies that do this another 4, they have more maturity in risk management. So I also recommend that it's very difficult for a company that are starting doing risk management to do, okay, I'm going to implement 8 risk management strategies. Make it iterative, incremental. When you have a lot of knowledge and experience, maybe you can move forward in the next 4. 7, sharing is distributing the risks among multiple parties, such as through partnership or joint ventures. This can spread the potential impact of the risks and make it more manageable. And sometimes it's confusing with the 8, that is spreading, or in other name, diversification. So spreading the risk across various projects, investments, or activities to ensure that failure in one area does not lead to catastrophic consequences. So you can say, well, but what's the difference? For me, it's sort of the same. So I prepared like a table to what are the difference between sharing and spreading. So sharing involves transferring or distributing the risk to other parties. So this can be related to transfer the risk, to be honest with you. So examples: insurance, purchasing insurance transfer to financial risk or certain levels, but also, and this is the extension or moving forward from the transfer, is partnership and joint ventures. Businesses can share risks by entering into partnerships or joint ventures where the involved parties share both the potential gains and losses. This is, for example, in in software as a service companies is very common. The partnerships, franchise maybe can be here, are contracts and outsourcing. Companies might outsource certain functions to other firms, thereby sharing the risks associated with those functions. For instance, a company might outsource its IT services to a specialized provider. And again, this I think is very connected with the transfer strategy. But as you can see, in the general idea, the transfer is more insurance. But as you can see in sharing, it's not just I transfer all of it, but I share some you, some me. But spreading and diversification involves spreading the risk across different areas within the same entity or portfolio. Example, investments diversification. An investor spread their investment across different asset classes, stocks, bonds, real estate, and industries to reduce the risk of loss from any single investments. Geographic diversification. A company operates in multiple geographic regions to mitigate risks related to political instability, economic downtowns, or natural disaster in a single region. Or product diversification. A business produces a range of products rather than relying on a single product line to spread the risk or decrease demands or recalls. So I hope it'll be clear the difference between sharing and spreading and diversification, because again, sharing is quite similar to transfer, but spreading is, I think, is another level. And sorry, I forgot the last two. The 9 is contingency planning. That I think is very related, as you can see, with loss reduction a little bit, because it's preparing for potential risks by developing action plans and research to address the risk if they materialize. This often involves creating backup plans and ensuring resources are available to respond effectively. You need to do this because, again, this is like, it's not, it's what you can do after the risk happen. Because sometimes you mitigate, it's prevent the risk from happening. But once the crash happened, maybe you already have the airbag, but maybe you also need the insurance, and maybe you need more things to do with that. Or maybe after cyber attack, of course, you need to do a lot of things to prevent the cyber attack. But if the cyber attack happen, what you gonna do after that? You always need a layered control. You need to prevent, detect, and correct. And we're going to talk about this in a few moments. And the last but not least, and this is very important if you choose the proactive perspective of risk management. Because again, we always talk about prevent, loss reduction, transfer, or even accept. But what if your proactive perspective is, you know what, this is not a risk, this is an opportunity, and I don't want just accept it, I want to exploit it. This is the last, it's exploitation, and in some cases, organizations might choose to exploit a risk to create a competitive advantage. This is more common in businesses environments where taking calculated risks can lead to significant rewards. It's basically, you know what, I'm not prevent this from happening, I'm gonna run after this. I'm gonna embrace it. This is the last one, but again, this is very connected with, let me go back, your risk appetite and the perspective. We can, I don't know, maybe, of course, this will be another class, and I hope we can do this class briefly about positive risks. There are some companies that declare that a risk won't be a risk as a negative thing, but an opportunity, and they're gonna accept it or exploit it. So, briefly, these are the 10 risk management strategies. that is 14, but I don't want to cheat you with the first one. So you can choose. And again, if you took all the risks that you have, choose wisely, because again, you cannot choose only one for the, you cannot avoid all the risks in your company, but of course you cannot accept all the risks in your company. And then what's next in the risk management cycle? Of course, when you have a risk management software, usually you can control these strategies. You can connect this strategy that you choose with the risk, because if you choose to mitigate the risk, you need to declare how much you will mitigate that risk. For example, if we're going to buy the helmets or the airbags in the company, or we're going to choose the preventing livelihood, you need to declare, okay, this specific control or strategy will mitigate the impact, the likelihood, a little bit of both. And once we put a strategy, once we choose a control, the idea is that the original risk, the inherent risk, will move to another area in the risk heat map, because the residual risk is the level of risk that remains after controls or risk management strategies have been implemented to reduce the inherent risk of an activity, process, of system. So whether you choose mitigate or loss prevention or loss reduction, the idea of that choose is that that risk move in your risk heat map from critical, from high to medium or low. That's why you're mitigating, and you need to declare that to your board or to your auditor or regulator. And maybe again, a specific risk can have different strategies and different control. Maybe the control one is a preventive. From this specific control, I'm going to prevent, for example, in the pandemic, a control, maybe the mask is one control, the hand washing, the social distancing, that is preventive. But another different control, even preventive, is the vaccine. That's another control. And okay, if the person already got the COVID, so we need controls to correct or to make the health better. So you can choose different strategies, different controls to move even more the residual risk of a specific risk. And that is risk management about. Is because some companies say, oh, are you doing risk management? Of course, I have a list of risks. What's next? What are you doing with those risks? This is risk management. And so the controls, whether a strategy that you choose refers to the measures and action implemented to mitigate or manage those risks within an organization. So some controls can be preventive, detective, or corrective. And again, the most successful strategy is to have layered controls, different controls. And the good idea in this matter is you don't have to invent the wheel. Maybe you already know your business, maybe you're very aware of your context, and okay, I can do this, I can do that, I can do another thing. But the good thing is there are other sources of controls that give you a specific definition of things that you can do, either from preventive or loss reduction or mitigate or avoid or whatever strategy you choose. For example, the ISO 27001 and the Annex A from the 2022 version have 93 controls for cybersecurity and privacy protection. So you don't have to invent. You buy the ISO, you choose the controls that you want to use to mitigate your risks. The NIST the risk management framework and National Institute of Standards and Technology also have special publications. And those special publications are a series of documents that provide guidelines, recommendation, and best practices for various aspects. For example, the NIST special publication 853 have a security and privacy controls for information systems. The special publication 882 have a guide of industrial control systems. So there are sources of controls that you can choose, and you don't have to invent what is already invented and investigated. So that's another great way to do it. And then, as you can see, we have another steps like monitor and reporting and continuous improvement. There are action plans that are very related for mitigation plans or contingency plans, because maybe you don't have a specific way to mitigate the likelihood or impact for a risk, but the action plan will help you to run those strategies. So the action plan outline specific steps to address identified risk. And when risks are identified, simply acknowledging their existence isn't sufficient. You need to clear a strategy. So the action plan also can help you to mitigate response and accountability. So the difference between action plans and controls is the action plans are activities designed to address particular risks. They outline that needs to be done, who is responsible, and when it should be done. And controls, they can include policies, procedures, processes, systems that prevent, detect, correct. So this is the theory. Nico is gonna hate me because usually the theory should take us like 30 minutes, but we already have 15 minutes. But I think the topic requires to do so. So how can you translate all this theory in a software, in a tool to help you do this? Is basically what Pirani does for our clients. So as you can see, you can translate all your risk management cycle in Pirani from all the process map that you have. So I put when we have my context, when we have my processes, so we can translate all my process map, the technology, the legal, the sales, the procedures. And we can, for example, in the technology process, I put the documentation, the flow, and I link the risks that are with this specific process. And then we can declare all the risks that I have in my company. And this is the list. And I know that in medication errors, supply chain disruption, cash handling errors, clinical trial, whatever risk you have in your list, you have the inherent risks based on the measure and assess that you do, and the residual based on the controls and the strategy that you implement. So, for example, these have not any change, maybe because they don't have any control linked. So I have their general information. I already know that the impact and the likelihood and the risk level is high, but I can choose the variables of the likelihood. So I'm going to change the likely for almost certain. As you can see in real time, I have the measure of this specific risk. So the next thing is what I'm going to do with this risk. So what will be the strategy? So maybe we can put a specific field here to choose the strategy that I want to follow. So I'm going to take changes here, and I'm going to customize, because I'm going to decide what is the risk management strategy that I want to follow. So I'm going to create a new field in the risks to create a new one. So I'm going to put a strategy. And I'm going to put this will be required, and this is going to be a multiple selection. So what you're going to do, you're going to avoid this risk. What you're going to do, you're going to transfer. You want to accept. Sorry. What you're going to do, you're going to, what One missing here, mitigate. But you know what? I'm gonna choose the 8. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna share, I'm gonna exploit, whatever strategy you choose. Maybe you can choose one frame or the 40, what is up to you. And it's gonna be mandatory, and I'm gonna publish. Because I want in my risk management strategy to have that information. So I'm gonna go back to risks, and then in the supply chain disruption, I'm gonna have, okay, the strategy that I'm gonna follow with this specific risk, I'm gonna, sorry, what is the name again? Supply chain disruption, I'm gonna mitigate that. I can't accept that. That would be ridiculous. And then I'm gonna go to, okay, what are the controls that I'm gonna implement? I already have a list, maybe compliance policies, maybe others, whatever. We can create another controls, helmet for delivery. I'm just gonna put examples, okay? I'm gonna back and I'm gonna choose, okay, this is specific control because I declare that I'm gonna mitigate. The helmet will mitigate the impact, and the compliance policies will mitigate the likelihood, for example. And with this information, look, the inherent risks change. I'm going to save changes, and we move from a specific, from critical to high, because I connect, we link 2 controls based on the risk strategy that I have. And for example, I can filter for all the risks that I have. You know what? I'm going to show me all the risks that I'm going to mitigate. Perfect. You're going to mitigate this. And this is risk management. And that's why you need first to choose your methodology, to choose your framework, and translate that in a risk management software. And that's what Pirani makes for our clients. It was very helpful, and we're running out of time. I don't know, Nico, if we have more minutes for questions.
Yeah, actually, we have like 4 questions, Alejandro. So if you want to, we can do like 2, and the other,
Okay.
we can send an email with the answer. So
Good.
Here, Jennifer said, how can an organization determine the most appropriate risk treatment option for the specific risk?
Well, that's a very good question, Jennifer. Let me go back here. And I think first, based on your perspective, is it defensive, is it proactive, and what is your risk appetite? And of course, I don't know if I should have put this slide here about first the 3 lines of defense, because usually who knows better the process? Who knows the risk of, for example, human resources, that the human resources team. So if they are connected with the process, sometimes they already know the mitigation plans, or the strategy that they can choose, but sometimes they don't have any idea. And where it comes the second line of defense, that is the risks or compliance area, that maybe they have more experience in mitigate and controls and strategies that they can help make a hand of that. And the third line of defense usually are the auditors. So maybe if not the first line, not the second line, and maybe at the end, the auditor say, oh, you know what, maybe it's good that you're doing these 2 or 3 controls, but what if you create a 4th and a 5? And I think that's a good idea of the 3 lines of defense. But again, and that's why I wanted to talk about the context and what are you doing risk management, because this will give you the path of what strategies to choose. Because maybe you are a internal control person that you want to accept a lot of risks, but the risk appetite of the company says, no, okay, my risk appetite is zero. You cannot do this. So you won't be able to make that strategy from happening. I hope that answered your question. And I think we have 1 minute for the last question.
Okay. Here we have another question. How can we ally our risk management strategy with the business strategy?
Well, I'm gonna give you the answer to that I don't have 1 minute to answer that question, but we have a specific class that actually says how to align risk to strategy. We already have the recording of that class in the Pirani Academy, and we talk about it. And if you need more information, you can also book a meeting with me, and I can gladly help you to do and translate that in Pirani. But that's a very good question, but unfortunately, I cannot answer that in 1 minute. But maybe check it out, that class.
Thank you so much for your great explanation, Alejandro, about this topic. Finally, I would love to invite everyone to participate in the short survey that will appear when this meeting ends. This will help us to continue improving our webinars. Thank you so much for your participation, and see you the next month.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.